Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, from the annual TechNet Cyber Conference, an interview with a veteran business owner trying to help the military secure troops' email, phone, and web traffic. Plus, when high-ranking military officers break the law, we talk to the author of a new book that delves into bad brass behavior. Also, more from the 2024 Warrior Games, the inspiring story of an Army veteran using adaptive sports to cope with a neurological disease. It's the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. The military is experimenting with troops bringing their own cellular devices to work. But is that safe? One Army veteran has been working to make a more secure way for service members to access email, Teams, and other CAC-enabled websites from their cell phones. Army vet Jared Shepard took his tech experience building infrastructure in Iraq to the private sector with his company, Hypori, which aims to improve digital security for mobile devices. A pilot program he started with the Army has also inspired a similar Air Force initiative. Here's what Shepard said about how he's trying to help the military realize the vision of using personal devices without them being compromised.
If you're a guardsman or a reservist and you have a day job or you're at home with your family, how do you access the internet? How do you access work stuff but not have to come into work to do it? The vision of Hypori was help solve that problem, protect the Department of Defense data against nation-state adversaries, but enable you to access the Department of Defense data in a way that doesn't risk your personal privacy or the data that's in transit or at rest. Hey, how can I do the normal work I have to do on a daily basis as a leader, as myself as a former non-commissioned officer? How can I do what I used to have to do, but I'd prefer to do it from home on my living room floor with my kids watching a football game, and I can knock out that work rather than having to spend a Saturday in the office. Now I can do it from anywhere. And that's what the Army is trying to get to, and that's what now the Air Force and Space Force are trying to get to, is how do we empower our service members to have access from anywhere in a convenient way, not in an overarching, like we're gonna make you do things all the time, but in a way in which enables you to have more flexibility and security from your own platform of choice. Space Force are actually already using our platform today, Hypori's platform today, and now they're going to scale. So, by July, they're actually going to scale it out and increase the platform across the Air Force and Space Force. The Army is already, has 50,000 and is getting ready to expand. To note, so the BYOD program in the Army, it's not just Hypori, it's also Azure Virtual Desktop. So if you need a laptop capability and you want to get to Windows, you use Azure Virtual Desktop. If you want a mobile capability, you can from a phone or tablet, you use Hypori. The government has a very hard challenge of trying to figure out how they're going to enforce that protection of data, right? And CMMC is kind of the manifestation of what that means. But it's very real, and people think this is just government oversight. It's not. This is, TikTok is not a social media platform. TikTok is a nation-state adversary platform. It is used specifically to collect and manipulate data. And if we're doing that from the same platform that you're also accessing CUI data, or you're creating information for the government that's sensitive to the government's need, we have a responsibility as industry to protect against that. The currency of the world today is data. It's not anything else. It's not money, it's not anything else, it's data. If the data touches the network, it's accessible. And that's one of the challenges I have, from a technology standpoint. We hear lots of companies who say, oh, well, but I encrypt it. Well, where? On the edge device? But it was unencrypted and handled at multiple places. It was handled by the processor, it was handled by a transmission mechanism, it was sent across the network. So it's exposed in all different types of places, right? And there is no one solution. So the idea of zero trust, everybody talks about zero trust now, right? Zero trust is not a technology. It is an idea. It is a methodology in which you implement security practices to ensure that not only do you protect your data, but you protect who's accessing the data. You trust nobody, validate everything.
Shepard also spoke about his nonprofit, warrior ethos, and the fact that roughly 2/3 of veterans have trouble transitioning from military to civilian life.
I was a young man with hardships that joined the Army, and the Army became my foundation in life, right? Whether it's, my moral or ethical compass, my fundamentals of leadership, being an infantryman, being a non-commissioned officer, it became the basis in which I became as a businessman, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a philanthropist. The Army was at the core of all of that for me. The military as a whole produces good men and women who have great basic values, patriotism, leadership characteristics, and fundamental understanding of how to make things happen. And when you hear anything bad about anybody who's ever served in the military, any of the bad statistics that are out there, divorce, homelessness, suicide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My theory is that those are all transition failures. That was a failure from the time that they took off the uniform for them to learn how to do the next thing. They don't need a lot of help. They just need a little bit of orientation. They need a little bit of access to tools and capabilities. They need a little bit of mentoring and coaching. And then cut them loose and they're gonna go crush the world, right? They're gonna go do great things. Warriors Ethos helps veterans in transition out of the military. Ideally, we get veterans who are 12 months out from service. They come in and roll into Warriors Ethos. We help them with resume prep. We help them with interview skills. We help them understand how to prioritize and actually create a plan for what transition looks like. And we'll even help them understand, like when they get that first offer letter, what that actually means. What does synthetic equity mean versus what does shares mean? What does options mean? How does that equate? What should your tax plan be? Because now you're in the military and all of a sudden you get out of the military and you're getting taxed for a whole bunch of new things that you were never taxed for before. All these things are a challenge for veterans, but not one that's insurmountable, just one that needs to be provided for. Veterans hit above their weight class, right? Veterans, as entrepreneurs, as leaders, whether it's leaders in business, leaders in politics, or, as I often say, just leaders at home, right? Being able to be present and be good mothers and fathers, for their kids and being able to give their kids opportunity. We owe that to them after their service to the country. So that's what Warriors Ethos is there for, and that's what we do.
And in your military headlines, the Marine Corps, Air Force, and Army say they're on track to hit 2024 recruiting goals, but the Navy is projected to miss yet again. The Air Force and Army have struggled the past 2 years, but are on track this time. The Navy, which has a higher enlisted accessions goal for 2024 than it did in 2023, is making healthy progress, but it is still projected to miss its goal for the second consecutive year. And the Corps, is once again outpacing its recruiting goal. And good Lord, the head of the Navy's Second Fleet is a physical training stud. Pull-ups can be hard, but not so for Vice Admiral Doug Perry, a Navy diver by trade. The 57-year-old recently banged out the pull-ups during the Navy's Fleet Week in New York City, completing what we counted as 19 in his summer whites. Look at this flag go. And nothing keeps your patriotic spirit alive like a good old-fashioned hot dog eating competition. But who do you think could eat more hot dogs? 4 soldiers or 1 competitive eater? 16-time winner of Nathan's hot dog eating contest, Joey Jaws Chestnut, kept his hot dog dominance alive against 4 soldiers at Fort Bliss, Texas this 4th of July. The pro eater ate 57 hot dogs in 5 minutes compared to the 4 soldiers' combined 49 hot dogs. Hot dog. And that's it for your headlines this week. When we return, an interview with the author of a new book focused on the bad behavior of high-ranking officers. Don't go away. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. When a military general or admiral breaks the law or commits any other corrupt act, it has an outsized effect given their high rank in the military structure. In a new book, Generals and Admirals, Criminals and Crooks, Dishonorable Leadership in the U.S. Military, author Jeffrey Matthews looks at some of the most egregious examples of failings by U.S. military flag ranks. And while these cases are a fraction of leadership, Matthews' book shows us which lessons can be gleaned by such failures. Navy Times editor Jeff Szulewicz brings us more.
We're joined now by Dr. Jeffrey Matthews. He's the George F. Jewett Distinguished Professor at the School of Business and Leadership at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington. He's also the author of the book, Generals and Admirals, Criminals and Crooks, Dishonorable Leadership in the U.S. Military. It's part history lesson, part categorization of all the times that U.S. military flag officers have failed to live up to their standards over the years. Dr. Matthews, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Jeff. Thanks for the invitation.
If you would, take us through the genesis of the book and how the idea to write about this came to you.
Yeah, so it really started around 2017. I really remember vividly reading a newspaper article in USA Today, and it was reporting on a Pentagon Inspector General report. And it basically said over the course of a 4-year period, that some 400 or 500 senior Pentagon leaders, civilian and military, had been punished for misconduct of one kind or another. And I was just thunderstruck by the number that many officers and senior civilians could have been penalized for misconduct, misbehavior of some kind. And so as I was kind of got on my radar there, and then I noticed on a month-by-month basis, there seemed to be a flag officer, a general or an admiral, who was getting fired from their position or being punished in one way or another. And it was a steady stream of misconduct. And I just thought, how is this happening within our military that our senior leaders are getting into trouble in terms of just the sheer quantity?
Sure. You note in the book's introduction that the vast majority of flag officers serve their country, with duty and honor as befits their position. Tell us a bit about, why you think it's important to understand, the bad apples that don't live up to that standard.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do. And I always try to make the point in talking to audiences that I believe that 99% of our generals and admirals are very honorable people. This book is not about them. This book is about the 1%ers, and I really don't like to think about it as just being bad apples, because what I really was able to find out was historically there's been a problem, contemporarily there's been a problem, and the problem continues to this day. We have a general on court-martial this week in a trial in Texas. And 3 weeks ago, we had a 4-star admiral who was indicted for corruption, and the problem's ongoing. And so one of the points I like to try to make is if 1% of our ships went aground every year, and 1% of our airplanes crashed every year, and 1% of our tanks, caught fire every year, there would be some massive investigations within the military to see what this problem is because the problem is systemic in some way, even though it's only a 1%. Still, 1% is a pretty big number when you think about the number, in this case, of generals and admirals that we have.
As you look at the modern day military, what is your thought or theory about, why flag officers kind of choose to go dirty, so to speak? Is there anything within the system that is failing? Are these individuals who kind of get into that, absolute power corrupts absolutely type paradigm? Everybody's been kind of saying yes to them forever, and they develop a sense of entitlement. Where do you think kind of the modern day seeds of this lie, and do they lie in more than one place?
They do. I don't think it's, it is the question. And I think the answers, there are multiple answers to it. A couple of thoughts that I have is, for some of these officers, flag officers, that they've had kind of corrupted character from the beginning. And so it's only over time, and they accumulate more power, that then it becomes a problem kind of in a broader, more impactful level as they gain rank. And so there's a question is, do we have a problem in our promotion system that is not identifying these people who maybe have corrupted character from the beginning? For other officers, I would say that it's more situational in its kind of development. So someone can serve honorably for the majority of their career, but then they find themselves in a corruptive situation of which they allow themselves to be corruptive. And so in those two examples, I would say in categories. And then the third thing I also like to point out is, I think sometimes what happens, and I can give a modern day example of this, is we can have within the branches, within the services, subcultures that develop over time. And these subcultures, maybe they start, the seeds of it is there's some misbehavior within a particular unit or area, and it's tolerated. But this misbehavior is tolerated. Over time, it becomes kind of normal that this behavior is to be expected. But then over further time, it becomes expected, right? Encouraged by the leadership. And so in the Navy, there's been both the examples of tailhook, where I think this happened in the subculture of the aviation community for the Navy and Marines, which led to tailhook, 91, the disaster there. And then also modern day in the Fat Leonard scandal, right, which is in terms of our 7th Fleet, right, in the Pacific. I think you also had this subculture also develop, right? We didn't have a comparable problem in the Atlantic, for example. And so I think if we look at those 3 major factors goes a long way, Jeff, I think, in explaining some people have corrupt characters to begin with. Some people have strong ethical foundations, but get corrupted over time or in particular circumstances, or we allow subcultures to develop that are characteristically problematic in that way.
When we come back, our personal finance expert is back with her latest tips. Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack talks about tips to help your small business flourish.
So you started your own business. Congrats! You've achieved what many Americans can only dream about. The next hurdle is surviving the first few years. The truth is, fewer than half of small businesses make it to the 5-year mark, and only a quarter are still operating after a decade. So how can you persevere over the long term? Continuing to invest in your business is a good start. Check to see if your computer hardware is up to date. When it comes to technology, newer means faster and more secure, and ultimately better protection from fraud, saving you money and lost business. Also, keep your vehicles and equipment in good shape. Fuel-efficient cars with newer safety features can save on gas and maintenance. And if you can't afford high upfront costs, think about leasing. Finally, review your complete overhead costs to see where you can cut expenses. If you're renting your space, maybe it's time to buy. Look into commercial real estate and talk with your lender to help you with the ins and outs. Bottom line, you should always be concerned with the bottom line. So take stock of your situation. Reinvesting in your biz could be what keeps you in the black for the long haul.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense topics, peer through those binos and check out militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to become the new champ at Dive Bar Trivia Night, sign up for our Early Bird Brief newsletter, compiled each morning to bring you the most recent headlines. Lastly, if social media is where you find open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. And until the government drops the hammer on it, we're on TikTok, so go find us there as well. When we come back, advice from a Warrior Games athlete on how to stay active and connected after an injury. Stay with us. The 2024 Warrior Games brought more than 200 military and veteran athletes to the ESPN Wide World of Sports complex in Orlando, Florida, to compete in 11 adaptive sports. While there, we sat down with Army veteran Gerald Blakely, who shared his experience living with a neurological disease and why he believes in the importance of the games. Check it out.
Hi, my name is Gerald Blakely, and I'm a retired Specialist 68 Whiskey combat medic. So when I was injured, I was pre-mob, and I was deadlifting, and I herniated my disc, and that sent me to the SRU the day I was supposed to deploy. It was tough getting treatment, and I actually didn't really heal as the way I should. It turned into this neurological disease called functional movement disorder, and which is basically like where my legs will randomly give out or I'll fall. It was just like a slow progression, and then in November I couldn't walk at all, and I was actually in a wheelchair for like a year and a half, just trying to rehabilitate. And so I've come a long way since then. I'm able to walk but sometimes I'm in a wheelchair still, sometimes I use a cane. And that can be tough because the people that see that from outside think that maybe you're faking it. And that can be really tough because really you might just be having a bad day. Through the whole process, it was really tough because it just wasn't getting better. And so that took a mental toll on my body. And then leading up to the Warrior Games, I was actually doing really well. I was really happy. And but then as soon as my legs started giving out right after, that's when my mental health really took a toll. And in November, I had suicidal ideations, and I just went down a deep, dark hole. And without adaptive sports, you know, I don't know if I'll be here. You know, when you're at a soldier recovery unit or whatever your branch calls it, it can be really mentally draining, especially if you're like living in the barracks and you're just doing your medical appointments and you're coming back and you almost feel alone. And then when you come out and you do these adaptive sports, now you're with a family again. The games are more than winning, and they're definitely more than medals. You know, they're about your journey and how you are healing and what you are doing to get better and how to help somebody else that may be in a similar situation. We all came from similar backgrounds, which can be tough in the civilian world when, you know, somebody didn't come from a military background. It's very different. And when you know, you know. And when you don't, you don't. Even people in other countries, they still served in the military. And so to have that connection with those people is, man, it's why I'm here. It's to make connections and to help me get better and help others get better, you know? There is a program out there for everybody. And Warrior Games is a great start, but if you don't get accepted to Warrior Games or you don't think this is right for you, there's many local organizations that are in your area that are out there to help you. And if there's not, there's also national organizations that can help you be connected with some of those organizations. It's a game changer and it's a life changer. So do your research, ask around, ask other people, just make connections. Make connections.
Well, that's all we have time for in this episode. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.